The Gorlice-Tarnów Offensive during World War I was initially conceived as a minor German offensive to relieve Russian pressure on the Austro-Hungarians to their south on the Eastern Front, but resulted in the Central Powers' chief offensive effort of 1915, causing the total collapse of the Russian lines and their retreat far into Russia. The continued series of actions lasted the majority of the campaigning season for 1915, starting in early May and only ending due to bad weather in October. Background: in the early stages of the Eastern Front, the German Eighth Army had conducted a series of almost miraculous actions against the two Russian armies facing them. After surrounding and then destroying the Russian Second Army at the Battle of Tannenberg in late August, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff wheeled their troops to face the I Army at the First Battle of the Masurian Lakes, almost destroying him before they reached the protection of their own fortresses as they retreated across the border. When the actions petered out in late September, the vast majority of two Russian armies had been destroyed, and all Russian forces had been ejected from the Masurian Lakes area of modern northeast Poland, losing almost 200,000 soldiers. Things were not going so well to their south, however. Here the bulk of the Russian army faced an equally large group of Austro-Hungarian units, who started their own offensive in late August, and initially pushed the Russians back well into what is now central Poland. However, a well-executed Russian counterattack in late September pushed them back over their own borders in disarray, allowing the Russians to start the siege of Przemysl. The Germans came to their aid by forming up the Ninth Army and attacking during the Battle of the Vistula River. Although it was initially successful, the attack eventually petered out and the Germans returned to their starting points. The Russians followed up by redeploying their armies for a further offensive into Silesia, placing both Austria and Germany at risk. When the Central Powers heard of this, the Ninth Army was redeployed to the north, allowing them to put serious pressure on the Russian right flank in what developed as the Battle of Łódź in early November. The Germans failed to encircle the Russian units, and the battle ended with an orderly Russian withdrawal to the east near Warsaw and the German occupation of Łódź. Weather prevented further actions over the next months. Battle. General Franz Conrad von Hotzendorf, the chief of staff of the Austro-Hungarian army, originally proposed the idea of breaking up the front line in the area of Gorlice. At first this idea was rejected by German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn, who believed that the fate of the war depended on the Western Front. Later he changed his mind and decided for a major offensive in the Gorlice-Tarnów area, southeast of Kraków, at the far southern end of the Eastern Front. In April 1915, the recently formed German 11th Army was transferred from the Western Front. Along with the Austro-Hungarian IV Army, it had to cope with the Russian Third Army, which held that sector. General Mackensen had been given command of both German and Austro-Hungarian forces, now united as the Army Group Mackensen, and on the 2nd of May, after a heavy artillery bombardment, he launched an attack which caught the Russians by surprise. He concentrated 10 infantry and 1 cavalry division on the 35 kilometers of the breakthrough sector of the front line against 5 Russian divisions. Opposing forces: Central Powers, Austro-Hungarian IV Army, Combined Division, Stołeczny, 14th Corps, 9th Corps, in reserve behind 9th Corps, 31st Infantry Brigade, 11th Honved Cavalry Division, German 11th Army, Guards Corps, Austro-Hungarian 6th Corps, XXXXI Reserve Corps, Combined Corps, Neusel, in reserve, 10th Corps, Austro-Hungarian 3 Army, 10th Corps, Russian 3rd Army, 9th Corps, 10th Corps, 24th Corps Infantry Regiment of 44th Infantry Division, 12th Corps Hussar Regiment, 21st Corps Regiment of 44th Infantry Division, 29th Corps Infantry Regiment of 44th Infantry Division and 132nd Infantry Regiment of 33rd Infantry Division, 11th Cavalry Division, behind the Russian front lines, scattered across the rear of 3rd Army. 3rd Corps Caucasus Cossack Division, 19th Infantry Regiment of 5th Infantry Division, 33rd Infantry Regiment of 9th Infantry Division, 167th Infantry Regiment of 42nd Infantry Division, Army Reserve, Brigade of 81st Infantry Division, 3 regiments of 63rd Reserve Division, Composite Cavalry Corps, 2nd Consolidated Cossack Division, 3rd Don Cossack Division. Developments: the Central Powers shattered the Russian defenses, and the Russian lines collapsed. Radko Dmitrij quickly sent 2 divisions against the Austro-German breakthrough, but being ill-prepared they were utterly annihilated without being able to report back to their headquarters. From Russian point of view, both divisions simply disappeared from the map. The Russian Third Army left about 140,000 prisoners in enemy hands, and almost ceased to exist as a fighting unit. The 3rd Caucasian Corps, for example, brought up to establishment of 40,000 men in April, found itself reduced to 8,000. It was thrown into the battle on the San against the Austrian I Army, and succeeded in taking some 6,000 prisoners and 9 guns. One division was down to 900 men on the 19th of May. The Russians were forced to withdraw. The Central Powers recaptured most of Galicia, and the Russian threat to Austria-Hungary was averted. Particularly gratifying was the recapture of Przemysl on the 3rd of June. The same day, fresh offensives were launched. The Austrian IV and 7 armies on the flank of the She Army aiming for the river Dniester. By the 17th of June, the defenders had pulled back on Lwow, the capital of Galicia, and on the 22nd Austria-Hungary's 4th largest city was recaptured. With this loss, which meant that most of Galicia had returned to Austrian hands, the lines stabilized in the south. The penetration progressed about 160 kilometers at its steepest, reducing the Polish salient to perhaps 1/3 of its pre-war size. Outcome: trying to save Russian forces from suffering heavy casualties and gain time needed for the massive build-up of war industries at home. The Russian Stavka decided to gradually evacuate Galicia and the Polish salient to straighten out the front line. A strategic retreat was initiated, which is known as the Great Retreat of 1915. Warsaw was evacuated and fell on the 5th of August to the new German 12th Army. At the end of the month, Poland was entirely in Austro-German hands, and 750,000 Russian prisoners had been taken.